start out by putting 3 numbers on our number line. Which numbers do you think those are going to be?
1, 0, and half.
Perfect. 1, 0, and 1/2.
Okay, I'm going to put half. Okay, you guys will be way bigger. Okay, I need to click. I'm going to be laser. There.
Once you have 1, 0, and 1/2 clicked on your line, I want you to raise your hands up in the air so I can tell which groups are finished. So Cooper, which numbers did I ask you to click on so far? Oh, okay, perfect. Perfect. I love that you're helping Rory out. I know she missed some school. So. Okay, almost there. Still waiting on to see some raised hands, so I know who's ready to move on. Okay, Jeremiah, think about where they're going to go. You have the whole space of the number line. 1 in is 0 and 1 in is 1. So where's the 1/2 going to go? So 0 is one end, 1 is the other. Those are your 2 kind of bookends of your number line. And then where do you think 1/2 is going to go? Directly in the middle. So why do you think we always start our number lines by clipping on 0, 1, and 1/2? Why do you think those are important, Jeremiah?
So that we don't have to cram them in later.
We don't have to cram them in later. There's an idea. Anybody else have an idea? Harper, what do you think?
Because it shows us where, like, so like if it needs to be in between, then we know where like the middle is and the ends are.
Exactly. So they give us a reference, right? So I know some of you were like, what in the world is a benchmark on your pre-assessment? So I'm sure that is a question that you had in your mind of what in the world is a benchmark? And that's exactly, in 0, 1, and 1/2 serve as benchmarks. So that's exactly what Harper said is correct. That those numbers give us an idea of where to place other numbers. So the definition of a benchmark is a known value or amount we can use to help us understand another value or amount. I want you to repeat after me. A benchmark is a number we know that helps us understand other numbers. Face a partner and tell them what I just told you. Coming back in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So we know what a benchmark is. What's an example of a benchmark? Sophia.
Like this might be the most obvious one, but 1/2.
1/2, exactly. So 1/2 is the most, is the benchmark that we'll use the most to help us kind of figure out where other fractions go on a number line. So we will look at a fraction and see, okay, is this closer to 0, in between 0 and 1/2, or is this closer to a whole, so it's in between 1/2 or a whole? Or we have, what are those fractions that have the same value as other fractions? What are those called? Equivalent fractions. So we can also see, okay, is this an equivalent fraction? Like, does it have the same value as 1/2? Give me an example of an equivalent fraction for 1/2. Like 2/4. Perfect. So speaking of fourths, next we're going to go ahead and clip the fourths onto our number line. So remember to use the benchmark fractions that the benchmark numbers you have on your number line so far to help you clip 1/2, or sorry, Mrs. Cole cannot talk today. 1/4, 2/4, and 3/4. Hi, Billy. You can go ahead and join the group.
Oh.
Do you guys still have your closepins? Friends, if you need more clothespins, the bag is up here on the circle table. Okay, once you have the fourths on your number line, raise your hands so I can see who is ready. Looks like everybody is ready. Perfect. Okay, so somebody tell me about where we placed those fractions on our number line in comparison to our benchmark. Olivia. Perfect. And where did you place the other fractions? And then where'd you put 2/4? Because it's a what? Equivalent fractions. Perfect. So by looking at 1/2, we were able to tell where our 1/4, 2/4, and 3/4 were going to go, because we know that 1/4 is going to be in between 1/2 and 0 because it's less than 1/2. We know that 2/4 is an equivalent fraction to 1/2. We already talked about that, so that's going to be clicked right on top of 1/2. And then 3/4 is more than 1/2, so it's going to be in between 1/2 and 1/2. Perfect. So now that we've done that, next you're going to clip on your eighths. So you have your eighth fraction. You should have your eighth fractions in front of you. Like I said, if you need more clips, we have some. And again, use your benchmark of 1/2 and also the other fractions you clipped on to help you figure out where your fractions are going to go. You can use here's a hint, you can use your fraction strips to help you figure out where some of those in between ones are going to go.
We don't have a 4/4 that we play with.
Oh no, I don't know. So you're good, no worries.
More than 2 Yeah, because it's half. 4/8 is equal to 1/2 is what I'm saying.
Okay, and then the next one is
If you're wondering where your chair is, Billy, I had to borrow it. I'll bring it back.
4/8. I know. Yes, you can. I might not stay. No. I'm surprised. Yeah, 4/8.
Probably go like
Here. Does it have to be 3/4?
Yeah, I remember one.
So that you're going to look how many clips you're using.
Yeah, because then it gets all lopsided, so it's
So like how mine is, how it's just stacked. How you make it like that. Because I'm only using, you're using 5 clips.
Hey.
I like these two are too close.
No, that's I'm gonna put it right there.
Where's that one gonna go?
There's 3 and 2.
Fourth grade, Addie has a great question. She asked, I see a few of you had it already. She asked about the fraction 2/2. So 2/2, and that is the same as what? 1/2, perfect. So you can go ahead and put it onto your 1/2.
These
Yeah, I think Jeremiah, I had suggested maybe taking some off of your 1/2
I just took photos off.
so that you had more clips to use. Because you had quite a few on your list. I think you guys lost one of your cards. I saw it fly off your number line.
This is yes.
Over there. I was just trying to tell you.
Your guys'
Looks good.
are doing very well.
This is kind of a seven.
Your number line is doing very well.
No, just kidding. It's a 3/5. Sorry. I'm not sure. A 3/5. So I'm not sure where.
And Jeremiah. Oh, I think that was my
Oh yeah, because we had to hand them.
Yeah, we're missing a 2.
That's all right. You have.
Okay, there's 7/8.
Alrighty, it looks like everybody is it looks.
I know what to do. The forehead.
Okay, rein it back in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I want somebody to raise their hand and tell me about how they were able to place the 8 fractions on their number line with what they have already landed.
We knew that there was 8 pieces, so we put them kind of close, but not that close.
Perfect. So you knew because there were 8 that you were going to have to fit, you could space them out, knowing that you'd have to have them evenly between 0 and 1, right? So that is exactly. So you know that you have 8 pieces that are going to have to squeeze in. So what are some of the equivalent fractions you found when you were clipping on?
4/8 is equivalent to 1.
Perfect. What other ones did we have? Olivia, you want to help them out?
2/8 is
Mhm.
equal to 1/4.
Yes, exactly. 2/8 is equal to 1/4, and there should be one more you have that's an equivalent fraction. 4/8.
6/8 is equivalent to 3/4.
6/8 is equivalent to 3/4. Perfect. You guys are doing an awesome job. What is something that you notice? So look at your number line. Step back for a second and take a look at it. Tell me what you notice about the relationship between a numerator and denominator as you go down the number line.
There's no one to it. Okay, I'm just gonna go first. No, look, the numerator one. Where's 8? They don't have an 8 either.
That's all right. You know that it'll be the same as 1 whole, so that's perfect. I'm glad that you're noticing those things. I don't think anybody has 8 over 8.
Yeah, we don't have an 8 over 8.
That's perfectly fine.
No, they just sound like here's my word. I need and boring keeps
Okay, bring it back in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. What are some things you notice about the relationship between the numerator and denominator of a fraction as you move down the number line? Olivia.
I noticed on the 1/2 there's the numerator is always half of the denominator.
Exactly, so perfect. So on a fraction that is equivalent to 1/2, the numerator will always be half of the denominator. That is an awesome observation. That'll help you so much as you get to even bigger fractions. You'll be able to know that if it's half of if the denominator or the numerator is half the denominator, it is equal to 1/2. So thank you, Olivia. What are some other things we're noticing about how we compare the numerator and denominator as we move down the number line? Anything you notice? So if we look at our number line, like let's use Billy's group over here as an example. So right next to 0, we have 1/8. So 1 and 8 are kind of far apart, right? They're not very close together. They have a larger difference. But then as we move down the number line, we end up at 7/8, and those are right next to each other, right? So what do we notice as we move down the number line?
The numerators get bigger, closer to the whole.
Exactly. So the numerator is getting closer to the denominator. It's getting bigger as we move down the number line because there are more parts being added to it. So that is a wonderful observation. And so that can kind of help us, like I said, that benchmarks can kind of help us connect with what we've learned with equivalent fractions. So, like I said, we have the benchmark of 1/2, and it has several equivalent fractions on our number line that we have already. And plus, there's so many more that we couldn't even fit on our number line. But like Callie said, as we move down the number line, the numerator is getting closer to the denominator. And when we start looking to compare fractions, we can keep that in mind. So if we know that, okay, this fraction is, the numerator is closer to the denominator than this fraction, which one do you think is going to be bigger? The one that's closer to a whole, right? So if we're looking at, maybe it may seem kind of crazy to look at 2 completely different fractions, like, let me think. So if we think like 9/12 and 1/3, it's like, well, those denominators are not the same at all. But if we think about it, well, those are equivalent fractions. This all wasn't thinking. Let's say 9/12 and like 2/6. So which one is going to be closer? Which one has the numerator that's closer in value to the denominator? The 9/12 is closer, right? So we can think that that will probably be the bigger fraction, right? So that will kind of start, if you keep that in mind by doing, remember this exercise that we did with the number line, and you keep that in your brain, it'll help you start to visualize how you can compare the size of fractions. And we're gonna begin to practice that with a little activity. So this is called Pac-Man math. So what we're gonna do is I have two fractions that are up here. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna take turns and the student's gonna come up and they're gonna play Pac-Man. So Pac-Man's hungry, right? And he's gonna wanna eat whatever the bigger fraction is. So you're gonna come stand in between the two fractions and figure out which one you think is greater. And you're going to make your arms in the right direction of whichever fraction is greater, because you wanna be eating the bigger fraction, right? Because Pac-Man's a hungry guy. So think about what are some tools that you could use to help you figure out which fraction is going to be bigger? So what about one that we just made? What did we just make? We made a number line. Perfect. So a number line is a tool that you can use to help you compare fractions. What are some other things that we learned about? Landon, what do you have in your hand?
Fractions.
Fraction strips, exactly. So I can use my fraction strips to help me compare between two fractions to figure out which one is going to be greater, right? And we also have our cross products that can help us figure out if fractions are equivalent, which can help us also compare them, because if you have fractions with two different denominators, I can think, okay, well, let's say we're comparing like 1/2 and 2/6. Okay, well I know 3/6 is equivalent to 1/2, so 2/6 is going to be lower than 1/2. So you can use your cross products theory or method to help you, Jeremiah, to help you decide which one is going to be bigger. So let's go ahead and practice this. Let's all move our number line out of the way. So let's have Sophia. You want to be my first Pac-Man?
Sure.
Okay, come stand in between my numbers. I want you to, so we have 1/2 and 1/3. So I want you to open up your arms to which one you think is bigger.
Like, give who, me?
Yes. So open up, which one do you think is bigger? Friends, I want the whole class to give me a thumbs up if they agree with Sophia's answer or a thumbs down if you do not agree. So I want to see everybody's thumbs up or down. Okay, so we have mostly thumbs up. We have a couple that aren't so sure. So Sophia's answer is correct, and we can compare it in a couple different ways. So we don't have thirds clipped onto our number line right now, but if we had them on there, we'd be able to see that the comparison between the two. But for example, we can use our fraction strips. So if we have fraction strip for 1/3 and the fraction strip for 1/2, we can compare them and see that 1/2 is a bigger part of a whole than 1/3 is. Perfect. You were a wonderful Pac-Man, Sophia. Thank you. Okay, so let's try another one. Alrighty, we have 2/5 and 1/2 this time. Landon, you want to give it a shot? Landon's going to come up and be our Pac-Man. See, which one do we think is greater, 2/5 or 1/2? Landon's thinking 1/2. Give a thumbs up if you agree with Landon, thumbs down if you don't agree. Waiting on everybody's thumbs. See where we're at. Looks like everybody agrees with Landon. Whoops. So Pac-Man will get fed today. Landon's answer is correct. And we can compare, again, using fraction strips. So we have our 1/2 strip. And here's 2/5, so we can see that 2/5 are smaller than 1/2. Perfect. Let's try another. 1/2 and 5/8. 1/2 and 5/8. Emily, you want to give it a try? Okay. So Emily thinks 5/8 is bigger. Give a thumbs up if you agree with Emily. Thumbs down if we don't agree. Alrighty, Emily is correct, but let's talk a little bit about why she's correct. So let's think about everything that we've talked about, maybe using our number line, or we talked about content equivalent fractions. Why is Emily correct? How do we know that 1/2 is less than 5/8? What do you think, Landon?
Because it only
Landon's looking at perfect. So Landon is looking at how the numerator is close to the denominator in this one. And if we also think about what is the equivalent fraction in eighths for 1/2? 4/8, exactly. And we know that 4/8 is going to be less than 5/8, right? So you're able to make those comparisons between those to remember that, or to realize that 5/8 is bigger. Perfect. I think we have a couple more here. Keep practicing. You guys are doing an awesome job. Who wants to be my next Pac-Man? Jeremiah, you want to give it a shot? All right. Decide which one Pac-Man's going to want to eat. Jeremiah's thinking 6/10. Give a thumbs up if you agree. Thumbs down if we don't agree. Let's see what we think. Looks like everybody's given a thumbs up. Perfect. He is correct. Someone tell me, why is he correct? How can you know, Olivia?
It's kind of like what we did last time. Like 5/10 is equal to 1/2, and so is 2/4.
Mm-hmm.
So 6/10 would be bigger than 1/2.
Exactly. Perfect. That's how we can use what we've learned about equivalent fractions and the benchmark fraction of 1/2 to help us compare fractions by making those kind of assessments. I love that you guys are making those connections. That is awesome. I think we have a couple more here. Thank you, Jeremiah. All right, we have 3/6 and 1/4. Callie, you want to come up and try it? Got it? Okay, 3/6 or 1/4. All right, Callie's saying 3/6. Thumbs up if you agree, thumbs down if you're not sure. Thumbs up if you agree, thumbs down if you're not sure. All right, it looks like everyone's giving her a thumbs up, and her answer is correct. So let's make those connections. Tell me why she's correct. What are we thinking? What do you think, Sophia?
I think that, I think she's correct because 3/6 is 1/2, and we all know that 1/2 is bigger than 1/4, or 1/4.
Yep, exactly. So we know that 3/6 is equivalent to 1/2, and which fourth is equivalent to 1/2, Sophia?
It's 2/4.
2/4. So since we just had.
So, I bet you can see why it's. I bet you can see why. Correct.
Exactly. So we know that since 3/6 and 2/4 would be equivalent, because we have 1/4, we know it's going to be less. You guys are doing so well with this. I love it. I think we might have one more. Let's have one more volunteer come up. Rory, you want to give it a shot? Let's go. So we have 4/5 and 5/12. 4/5 and 5/12. So Rory's thinking 5/12. Thumbs up if you agree, thumbs down if you don't. Okay, so let's talk about it. So 5/12 is the lesser fraction. And what are some tools that we could use to figure out why? What do you think, Callie?
First, 5/12 isn't half. If you use that benchmark fraction, the half mark, 5 isn't half of 12, so that wouldn't be quite half. But 4 is over the half mark for 5, and so that would make the 4/5.
Perfect. So we know using our benchmark, so that's one of our tools we can use, that 4/5 is going to be more than a half, but 5/12 is going to be less than a half. And what do we notice about the relationship between the numerator and denominator, between 4/5 and 5/12? What do we notice, Olivia?
The 4/5, the numerator is closer to the denominator.
Exactly.
As the 5.
Yes, so 5 and 12 are kind of far apart, but 4 and 5 are right next to each other, so we know that that's going to be closer to our whole, right? Because if we get this number, two same numbers over each other, we know they are equivalent to one whole. Well, you guys have done awesome with this, and we're going to try a little bit more. What I want you to do is you can leave your number lines where you are, or where they are, and I want you to, again, you're going to be working with your desk group. Somebody get out an expo marker, and across 2 desks, I want you to kind of make your number line write 0 and 1 on the two ends, and then 1/2 right in the middle.
Are we taking our number here?
Go ahead and leave your number line up because it'll kind of help you for this activity too.